かなりいい攻撃だったぜ。グッときたよ。それじゃあもう蹴りをつけるかな。その意見だけには賛成ですよ。終わりだな。俺の闇がお前の太陽を飲み込んだ。つまり魔力に関しては俺に分があるような。我の攻撃が通用しない。誰が決めた。我の太陽を飲み込んだ。誰が決めた。震えるさ。決めるのは我だ。死ね。
Greetings YouTube, welcome back to the MetaNerd channel. I am Marcus, bringing you another video for Cardfight Vanguard Overdress. In this video, of course, following as we are approaching the release for DBT03, what better time to introduce all 3 new decks for DBT03. In this video, of course, we're gonna talk about the new Dark States right line, which is Greedon himself, the Godfather. Of course, I did not cover Gravidia nor Linger, as I don't really have a good analysis of how she should be run, or since we got a pretty good idea on what Greedon does, I will be starting from Greedon. Of course, Gravidia as well as Flagberg will be next, just that depends on what are the supports that they have, because at the moment Gravidia does not have enough support to justify making a video for. Flagberg will most likely be next. Without further ado, let's start with Greedon. Of course, Greedon as a mechanic, Greedon is a Vanguard centered playstyle, meaning that most of your attacks is going to focus on the Vanguard, and what this means is that the Vanguard will be restanding once, unless Bushiroad decides to give us some more cards that actually superior calls themselves from the soul, which is highly unlikely. I don't know. The second Vanguard attack is the most dangerous out of the 2 Vanguard attacks that Greedon will do, because most of your skills will activate when you basically suck in that rearguard to soul. We will talk about them later down the video. For a surprising reason is that this deck is less reliant on the Persona Ride, because of there is one skill that Greedon has that basically not letting you Persona Ride, because you will want another copy of himself in the soul rather than you Persona Riding. Persona Riding, think of it as kind of a bonus. It's appreciated but not really needed. This deck is less susceptible to retiring decks as well as prison decks, because most of your stuff are going to go to soul except for one rearguard. So retire decks is not going to do anything to you. Prison decks, well, while they can still prison from your drop zone, it's not really going to prevent you from doing anything very specific. This deck also features the first ever 7 damage count out of all the Dark Zones clans. I mean, of course, Angel Feathers does have the 8 damage limit count, but this is the first one in the dark zone or dark states. And since his damage limit count is at 7, means that this deck will be very, very tanky. I mean, you can just no guard for days and you still won't die at 6. So it is comfortable skill to play with. As I mentioned before, a lot of our units will have their skill activate when they go from the rearguard to soul, as well as some units will have their skill activated when they are in the soul. Of course, there is some soul management required skill that is required. You do soul blast in this deck, and there is some skills with soul requirement in order to activate their skill, so you do really need to keep in mind. Also, this whole right line features a 7 deadly sins as well as a devil theme, which is kind of my favorite, and most probably I will be getting this deck. First up, of course, we have Desire Devil Taida, which is the Sin of Sloth, if I'm not mistaken. Of course, he is a generic starter, nothing really much to talk about, but I want to take some time to appreciate the art. The art really embodies the Sin of Sloth. He's just there floating around, not doing anything. Yeah, and he's kind of cute. Next up is Desire Devil Gouman. Auto, when this unit is rode upon by Desire Devil Boshoku, cost, reveal an Avaricious Demonic Dragon Greedon from your right deck and draw a card. Second skill, Auto, when this unit is put from rearguard circle into your soul by your Vanguard's ability, if your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, cost Counterblast 1. And until the end of turn, when your opponent would call cards from hand to Guardian Circle, they must call 2 or more at the same time. So this is the Sin of Pride, if I'm not mistaken, because Gouman literally translates to pride. He is the easiest on-right skill to date because you're basically guaranteed to have Greedon in your right deck. Unless for some reason you're not, then something is wrong somewhere. The God restrict on this devil skill is that it will last the whole turn, meaning that the second time your Vanguard attacks as well as your one rearguard attacks will have this God restrict skill, meaning that if your opponent wanted to PG both Vanguard second attack as well as your rearguard attack, they will have to throw a total of 6 cards, 2 being PGs, 2 discard cards, and 2 additional cards from the God restrict skill, which is really devastating and may potentially cripple your opponent so that they do not really have an extra turn. Also, something to keep in mind is that Blitz Order actually ignores the second skill, because the way how Blitz Order skill and the fact that we have an order zone already, this devil skill is very dangerous in the late game. In the early game, most people will just no guard. Next up, we have the Grade 2 Desire Devil Boshoku. Auto, when this unit is rolled upon by Avaricious Demonic Dragon Greedon, cost, put a card from your hand into your soul. Search your deck for a card with the same card name as this card, reveal it and put it into your hand, and shuffle your deck. Second skill, Continuous Soul. During your turn, if your damage zone has 4 or more cards, the Avaricious Demonic Dragon Greedon on your Vanguard gets power plus 5k. So this card is the Grade 2, and of course what he does is basically he can helps you filter out your deck for a copy of himself, as well as putting 1 card from your hand to the soul. So there are potentially some target card that you will want to put into your soul. The first one, of course, being himself, because he does give the Greedon 5k power. The second one is the Crimson Expeller we have in the previous set. Since Crimson Expeller does have a skill that you can activate in the soul to give the Vanguard more power, which is not bad, and you don't really minus the soul from him. And of course, there is another card, Greedon himself, because in order to activate one of Greedon's skill, you will need to have 1 Greedon in your soul, which we will talk about later when we go through Greedon. Now, the 5k in this Boshoku's skill is actually really good because they are actually stackable, and since most of the time Boshoku is your prime target to pay for the cost that requires to put a card from your hand to the soul, meaning that at the minimum, if you don't get any Boshoku from your draws, you will get a minimum of 10k. Overall, really nice, and you can start to see why Greedon Restand skill is really good, because there's a lot of free power. These powers are all free. They just have to exist in the soul, and that's it. Next, of course, the big man himself, the Godfather, Avaricious Demonic Dragon Greedon. Continuous Vanguard Circle. If your soul has an Avaricious Demonic Dragon Greedon, the number of cards in your damage zone for you to lose becomes 7. Second skill, Auto, Vanguard Circle. At the end of the battle that this unit attack, cost Soul Blast 2 and put 4 stand rearguard into your soul, and stand this unit. If your soul has 10 or more cards, this unit gets 15k power until the end of turn. Of course, Greedon himself increases your damage count to lose to 7, meaning that when you normally will lose in the 6 damage, this card will basically increase that to 7, which is surprisingly really tanky in a sense. And also, the 7 damage limit count, if you are at 6 damage, this basically negates your opponent's 6 damage heal trigger, because since you're at 6, your opponent therefore could not heal, which will basically guarantee your opponent to lose if you, the Greedon player, are at 6 damage. And also, here comes the question where you would want to consider is that, do you want to Persona Right, or do you want to have your damage count increase to 7? For me personally, I think after testing a little bit on Greedon, I think the best answer is you would want your damage to be 7, because Persona Right is nice and all, but then I would rather have that comfort of having 7 damage count instead of more power and a draw, because you already have a lot of power, and not to mention that you don't lose a drive check. You have 4 drive check and they may possibly be triggers, and you can therefore pump up your front row, which is still really good. However, the downside is that the first time Greedon attacks is going to be the less threatening one, because there's no like guard restrict or anything. One thing I want to mention is that don't stress too much on getting the 15k on the first Grade 3 right. I did try this like to an extent. Most of the time I can only get until 9 soul, and yeah, of course you do need 10 soul in order to get the 15k, but most of the time it's the 15k is not really like super important. You just need that restand, that's it. Unless of course you play cards that actually soul charge since turn 1, then that's a different story, but I still think you don't want to rush the soul. The the other cards that Greedon has is the one that makes Greedon really disgusting. Let's take a look. First off, we have Desire Devil Inken. Auto, when this unit is placed on rearguard circle, if you persona right this turn, soul charge 1. Second skill, auto, when this unit is put from rearguard circle into your soul by Vanguard's ability, cost counterblast 2. Choose one of your Vanguard and it gets 5k and 1 drive until the end of turn. First off, the first skill is mandatory, but we'll mostly ignore. As I said before, you don't really want to prioritize persona riding if you do not have a copy of Greedon in your soul. So the soul charge one is kind of neglectable. I mean, of course, if you do personal ride, it does give you the 1 soul, but by that time you will already be at 10 or more souls. So this skill, while it is mandatory, it should not be the skill that you prioritize. Skill that you should be prioritizing is the second skill. This second skill can make Greedon second attack attacking with 4 drive as well as 10k power. Of course, you do need to counterblast 4, so that's one thing to keep in mind, but it's still fine. It's still fine. It is doable because you don't really use a lot of counterblast in this deck. So the second attack will be at plus 10 as well as 4 drive is really good. And luckily we do not have anything that superior calls themselves from the soul after the Vanguard attack or something. Otherwise, Greedon is gonna be one scary unit. Now, you don't really want to prioritize using Inken at the later game. You will mostly use this card probably the first grade 3 turn. Next up, we have Desire Devil Mukka. This card is easily my favorite card art out of all of the Desire Devil. Auto, when this unit is placed on rearguard from hand, if your Vanguard is Avaricious Demonic Dragon Greedon, cost Counterblast 1 and Soul Blast 2. Choose a card from your soul and call it to rearguard circle. Second skill, auto, rearguard circle. When your Vanguard attacks, if you persona right this turn, choose one of your Vanguard and it gets 5k until the end of turn. Now, when they first revealed Desire Devil Mukka, I thought to myself, this card is so bad. This card is really bad because of the heavy cost. But then as I play tested, this card is actually really great in the late game because when you move to the late game, you already have abundance of soul. And since this deck does not really use a lot of counterblast, the counterblast is basically negligible. And the main target that you are looking for when you use this card is actually the Gouman as well as Inken. These two cards are the main priority target that you will want to call in the later game. Of course, you would want to prioritize Gouman instead of Inken because Gouman gives you the guard restrict for both the Vanguard and the rearguard. By that time, I'm sure you will have an abundance of soul already. So the Soul Blast 2 is actually meant to basically restrict you from abusing some of the skills that you may have in your soul. Of course, you're not going to call Boshoku because Boshoku needs to be in your soul at 5k. His value is mainly aimed for the late game. He is not aimed to be used on your first grade 3 ride because, I mean, Soul Blast 2, it's a little bit hard. The second skill is really nice because it gives your Greedon more power, but then of course, sad to say that you're not going to persona ride most of the time, so the second skill is just there to be a bonus, something like that. Unless of course Bushiroad does gives us something that can actually help Greedon to personal ride, I don't think the second skill will do much at the moment. Same goes for Inken, the Soul Charge 1. Now the last Desire Devil is Desire Devil Yaba. Active, Soul. If your Vanguard is Avaricious Demonic Dragon Greedon, cost, put this card into your drop. Choose one of your Vanguard and it gets 5k power until the end of turn. Now, this is a relatively simple skill. You basically exchange one of your soul, which is himself, for more power. In my testing phase, he's not really useful. I mean, the only usage that I basically utilize this card is basically by throwing him away for the right deck cost, or basically just use Time Jared Dragon to basically put him to the soul to draw 1, or use Boshoku skill to put him in the soul to draw 1. Most of the time he will stuck in the soul until the much later game where you will need all the power you can get and basically go for one final push. That's it. Other than that, I don't see much usage for this because, I mean, it's not doing much except in the late game, that is. And that is all for this video. Do let me know down in the comment section on what do you think of Greedon. For me, I will definitely get this deck as well as max rarity it. Hopefully. Do like and subscribe if you like this video. And also, please remember to ring the bell notification icon so that you don't miss a video I upload. With that being said, I'll see you all on the field.